Let's imagine this for a moment, my friends. Suppose we sat down a few weeks from now, only to discover that Prince Harry had travelled all the way back to Britain 4 or 5 days on his native soil and never once met with his father, King Charles. What message would that send? Not only to Harry himself, not only to the King, but to the British public and to the world watching so closely. Would it not feel like a tragedy? That even in the face of illness, even in the shadow of history, father and son still could not sit down together. Picture this scene. Harry walking through London, perhaps visiting the places of his childhood, the parks where Diana once took him, the streets he knows by heart. And yet, despite being mere miles from his father, the distance between them remains infinite. What a profound sadness that would be, not just for them, but for all of us who believe in the possibility of healing. Because the truth is, the rift remains. There is no denying it. The wounds run deep, carved by years of misunderstanding, public disputes and private pain. But too often I hear people say, well, reconciliation is impossible. Harry must apologise first. Harry has more to answer for than anyone else. These voices echo through social media, through newspaper columns, through conversations in pubs and living rooms across Britain. But I ask you, have we forgotten what this young man has endured? Have we become so caught up in the drama, the headlines, the palace intrigue, that we've lost sight of the human being at the centre of this story? Here is a son who walked behind his mother's coffin at just 12 years old, under the gaze of millions. Can any of us truly comprehend what that must have felt like? To be a child in the deepest throes of grief, yet forced to perform that grief in front of the world? The cameras captured every step, every moment of composure he managed to maintain, but they could never capture the devastation in his young heart. A son who served his country on the front lines of Afghanistan while others stayed safely at home. He didn't have to go. He could have taken a ceremonial role, attended ribbon cuttings and garden parties, but Harry chose to serve alongside his fellow soldiers, to face the same dangers, to earn his place through courage rather than birthright. He flew Apache helicopters in some of the most dangerous regions on Earth, not for glory, but because he believed in service to something greater than himself. A son who gave up the privileges of his birth to build a life defined by service, compassion and authenticity. Think about what he walked away from: the guaranteed security, the royal residences, the centuries of tradition that would have been his inheritance. He chose uncertainty over comfort, truth over convenience, love over duty, as it had been defined for him. And yet we are told he must do all the apologising. We are told that he alone bears responsibility for this fractured family. But is this fair? Is this just? I think of the young man who created the Invictus Games, who saw wounded veterans struggling not just with physical injuries, but with the invisible wounds of war, and said, I must do something. Not because protocol demanded it, not because it was expected of him, but because his heart broke for these brave men and women. The Invictus Games didn't emerge from a royal committee or a palace strategy meeting. They emerged from Harry's genuine desire to serve, to heal, to give meaning to suffering. Of course, Harry has spoken words that cut deeply, and the royal family too has had their grievances. The interviews, the memoir, the Netflix series, these were not without consequence. They revealed private conversations, challenged long-held assumptions, and forced uncomfortable truths into the light. Charles has felt the sting of criticism, the weight of judgment from his own son. William has watched his brother air family grievances on the world stage. These are real wounds, and they deserve acknowledgement. But reconciliation is never one-sided. It cannot be. For there to be healing, both father and son must extend their hands. Both must set aside pride. Both must be willing to see the other's perspective, to acknowledge their own failings, to choose love over being right. And if Charles truly wishes for his legacy to endure beyond the crown, if he wants to be remembered as more than a constitutional monarch, but as a father who understood the deeper meanings of leadership, he must see that shutting his door to Harry is not strength, it is a wound that will never close. Consider what Charles's legacy could be. He has waited longer than any heir in British history to become king. He has championed environmental causes when they were unpopular, spoken out for architecture and community, when others focused only on economics. He has the opportunity now to show that true kingship includes the wisdom to heal, the courage to admit mistakes, the grace to forgive. But if he allows this rift with Harry to define his reign, what will history say? That he was a king who could unite a commonwealth, but not his own family. Now, some insist that William and Meghan must be part of any reconciliation, that Harry alone cannot mend the divide. Perhaps there is truth in that families are complex webs of relationships, and the Sussexes' pain has been shared by both Harry and Meghan. Meghan, who entered the royal family with hope and enthusiasm, only to face challenges that drove her to contemplate the unthinkable. Harry has watched the woman he loves endure scrutiny that he believes contributed to her mental health struggles. This is not abstract pain, it is visceral, immediate, life-altering. The brothers' relationship, once so close that they seemed like two halves of a whole, has become perhaps the most tragic casualty of this entire saga. William and Harry, who supported each other through their mother's death, who walked through their darkest days together, now seem like strangers. William, the dutiful heir, watches his brother's choices with bewilderment and hurt. Harry, the spare who never wanted to be defined by that role, sees his brother as someone who has chosen the institution over family. Both are right, both are wrong, both are hurting. But let us not forget, the first step need not be a grand summit with all parties gathered at the table. The first step can be as simple, as human, as a father and son sitting across from one another and saying, "How are you? How's your health? How are the children?" These are the words that families speak when they choose connection over conflict, when they decide that love is more important than winning. Imagine that conversation. Charles, perhaps frailer than Harry remembers, talking about his treatment, his hopes, his fears about the future. Harry sharing stories of Archie's first day at school, of Lilibet's first words, of the life he's building in California. No cameras, no advisors, no protocol, just a father and son remembering that beneath all the titles and expectations, they are family. And is that not where we should begin? With compassion, with care, with the understanding that time is not infinite, that every day lost to silence is a day we cannot take back. Charles is 75 years old and facing a cancer diagnosis. Harry is 40, no longer the young man who left Britain in search of a different life. Their children are growing up without knowing their grandfather not as the king, but as the man who might have bounced them on his knee, told them stories, shown them the gardens at Highgrove. Because behind the headlines, behind the palace walls and the endless speculation, this is not a matter of monarchy. This is a matter of family. Strip away the crowns, the titles, the constitutional implications, and what remains? A father and son who have lost their way back to each other. A family torn apart by circumstances, expectations, and perhaps most tragically, by love expressed in ways that couldn't be understood or received. Charles loves Harry, of this I am certain, but his love has been filtered through duty, protocol, and the weight of an institution that has shaped his entire life. Harry loves his father, this too is evident in everything he says and does. But his love comes with conditions now, with demands for acknowledgement, protection and change that Charles may not know how to provide. And yet, my friends, there are those who doubt reconciliation altogether. They point to Harry's security concerns, his memoir, his interviews, and say, too much damage has been done. They catalogue every slight, every revelation, every moment of pain made public, and declare the situation irreparable. But I would argue the opposite. Harry's honesty is not a barrier, it is a bridge. Because only when the truth is spoken aloud can healing begin. Pretending all is well, sweeping pain beneath the carpet, only ensures that history repeats itself. The royal family has a long tradition of silence, of maintaining dignity through discretion, but this silence has also been a prison, trapping generations in patterns of emotional distance and unspoken grievances. Harry's willingness to break that silence, while painful, offers something unprecedented, the possibility of authentic relationship within an institution that has always struggled with authenticity. Think of the alternative. Harry could have stayed, smiled for the cameras, performed his duties, and slowly withered inside. Meghan could have continued to endure treatment that was damaging her mental health. Their children could have grown up in an environment where love was conditional on conformity. Would that have been better? Would that have served anyone, the family, the monarchy, or the people they're meant to serve? Remember, Princess Diana herself once longed for a monarchy that embraced openness, warmth, and emotional honesty. She wanted to bring the royal family closer to the people, to show that beneath the formality and tradition were real human beings with real feelings. Harry is simply continuing the legacy of his mother. That is not betrayal, it is devotion. Diana understood that the monarchy's greatest strength lay not in its distance from the people, but in its ability to connect with them on a human level. She showed us that royalty could be both regal and relatable, both dutiful and emotionally honest. When Harry speaks about his struggles with mental health, when he talks about the importance of therapy and emotional well-being, when he prioritizes his family's happiness over royal expectations, he is walking the path his mother began. But Diana's legacy is more than just emotional openness. It's about service that comes from the heart. Every cause she championed, from landmines to AIDS awareness, came from a place of genuine care and connection. Harry's work with veterans, his advocacy for mental health, his commitment to environmental causes, these aren't public relations exercises. They're extensions of the empathy and service Diana instilled in him. Now, many will ask, what role does William play in all this? Can Harry and Charles meet without William's shadow looming large? The brothers were once inseparable, united by shared trauma and mutual protection. They created a foundation together, supported the same causes, presented a united front to the world, but marriage, duty, and different visions for their lives have driven them apart. Of course, Charles will seek counsel from his heir. William's opinion matters enormously to his father, as it should. William will one day be king, and his relationship with Harry will impact the monarchy's future. But William's judgment, however loyal to his father, is clouded by his personal resentment. He has watched his brother leave the family business, criticize the institution William has dedicated his life to serving, and make choices that William believes have damaged the monarchy's reputation. William's anger is understandable, but it is also limiting. To allow one son's anger to dictate another son's place in the family, that is not leadership. That is favoritism, and it comes at the cost of unity. A future king must learn to see beyond personal grievance to the greater good. Sometimes that greater good includes forgiveness, even when it's difficult. The tragedy is that both brothers are trying to honor their mother's legacy in their own ways. William through dutiful service within the system, Harry through breaking barriers and speaking uncomfortable truths. Neither approach is wrong, but their inability to see the value in each other's path has cost them their relationship and deprived their children of the close family bonds they might have had. The British public has been polled, as they so often are. And yes, the numbers may suggest that Harry and Meghan's popularity has waned. Headlines scream about falling approval ratings, about the public's growing impatience with royal drama. But I urge you, do not mistake polls for truth. Do not mistake headlines for the heartbeat of a nation. Polls capture moments in time, influenced by whatever story dominates that particular news cycle. They cannot measure the complexity of human emotion or the capacity for change and forgiveness. For every critic who says Harry should never return, there is another voice, quieter, perhaps saying, he deserves compassion. He deserves a chance to belong again. These are often the voices of parents who have watched their own children make choices they didn't understand, of families who have experienced their own rifts and reconciliations, of people who understand that love is messier and more forgiving than public opinion. I have spoken to many ordinary people across Britain, and while some are weary of the drama, others recognise the humanity of the situation. They see a son who longs for connection, a father whose time may be limited, and they ask the simplest, most profound question of all: why not try? These are people who understand that families are complicated, that good people can hurt each other without meaning to, that pride and stubbornness can keep us apart even when love remains. They've watched Harry grow up, seen his service to the country, witnessed his genuine commitment to causes that matter. They may not agree with all his choices, but they recognize his humanity. There's also a generation of young people who see Harry differently than their elders might. They see someone who chose mental health over duty, who protected his family over tradition, who spoke his truth despite the consequences. To them, Harry isn't a traitor to the monarchy. He's someone who had the courage to choose authenticity over approval. And so I say to those who dismiss Harry, who call him petty or selfish, look again. Look at the man who built Invictus to honour wounded veterans who saw their struggle and decided to create something beautiful and meaningful from their pain. Look at the man who has shielded his wife and children from the cruelest attacks of the press, who learned from his mother's experience and chose protection over protocol. Look at the man who continues, despite rejection, despite criticism, despite every reason to walk away completely, to extend his hand toward reconciliation. That is not weakness, that is courage. It would be so much easier for Harry to cut ties completely, to build his life in California without looking back, to protect himself from further hurt by closing his heart to the possibility of reunion. But he doesn't. In every interview, in every public statement, there's still hope, still love, still the door left open for his family to walk through. This persistence in the face of repeated disappointment takes extraordinary strength. It requires Harry to make himself vulnerable again and again, to risk public humiliation, to endure criticism from people who see his hope as weakness or delusion. But he continues because love requires this kind of courage, the courage to keep reaching across the divide even when your hand keeps getting slapped away. Now, perhaps a meeting will not solve everything. Perhaps words spoken over tea at Clarence House will not erase years of pain, mistrust, and accumulated grievances. The wounds run deep on all sides. Charles may struggle to understand choices that seem to reject everything he holds dear. Harry may find it difficult to trust promises of change after years of feeling unsupported and unprotected. But healing does not need to happen all at once. It begins with small steps, an embrace that lasts a beat longer than protocol requires, a question about grandchildren asked with genuine interest, a smile that says, "Despite everything, I am glad you are here." These moments of connection, however brief, can begin to rebuild what has been broken. Reconciliation is rarely a dramatic moment of forgiveness and instant reunion. More often, it's a series of small choices to stay engaged, to listen rather than defend, to choose curiosity over judgment. It's the decision to see the person behind the position, to remember love beneath the layers of hurt and anger. Harry understands this. His words in recent interviews suggest that he no longer seeks to resolve every grievance in one sitting, no longer expects immediate acknowledgement of every wrong or instant change from an institution centuries in the making. Instead, he seeks something simpler, more human contact. Connection, the knowledge that despite everything he is still a son and Charles is still his father. This evolution in Harry's approach is significant. It suggests a maturity born from his own healing journey, a recognition that change happens gradually and that perfection isn't the enemy of progress. He seems to understand now that his father may never be able to give him everything he wants or needs, but that doesn't mean they can't have some form of relationship. And if Charles refuses this, if the king, despite his son's continued overtures, despite the passage of time and the urgency created by his own mortality, closes the door, then I ask you, who appears small? Is it Harry, who travelled across an ocean in hope, who continues to speak of his father with love despite everything? Or is it Charles, who allowed pride to outweigh love, duty to overcome mercy? The world is watching this family drama unfold, and they're drawing conclusions not just about Harry or Charles, but about the monarchy itself. What does it say about an institution that it cannot heal its own wounds? What does it say about leadership that cannot find a way to accommodate both duty and love, tradition and change? History will judge Charles not only as a king, but as a father. His reign may be defined as much by how he handled this family crisis as by his environmental advocacy or constitutional duties. If he chooses reconciliation, even imperfect reconciliation, he will be remembered as a king who understood that true strength sometimes requires vulnerability, that leadership sometimes means admitting mistakes. The British people value family above all. This is a nation that understands quarrels between siblings, tensions between generations, the complexities of love within families. They understand hurt feelings and wounded pride, but they also understand forgiveness, second chances, and the importance of family unity, especially in times of difficulty. If Charles cannot extend that forgiveness, if he cannot find a way to welcome his son home in some capacity, I fear history will not remember him kindly. He will be seen as the king who allowed personal grievance to override paternal love, who chose institutional preservation over family healing. The stakes are even greater for the broader monarchy. The royal family's ability to remain relevant in the modern world depends partly on their ability to model the values they claim to represent. If they cannot demonstrate forgiveness, growth, and the capacity to heal their own wounds, how can they inspire these qualities in the nation they serve? For Harry, the stakes are also enormous, but they're more personal than institutional. This is not only about a father-son bond, though that would be significant enough. It is about whether Archie and Lilibet will know their grandfather not as a face on a coin, but as a warm presence in their lives. It is about whether Diana's grandchildren will grow up with the family she cherished, connected to their heritage and their British roots. Imagine Archie and Lilibet growing up with stories of a grandfather they never knew, seeing him only in photographs and news reports. Imagine them asking why they can't visit the palaces their father grew up in, why they can't play in the gardens where their father once played. These children are innocent of the conflicts that have torn their family apart, yet they bear the consequences. Diana would have been heartbroken to see her grandchildren separated from their royal family. She who fought so hard to give William and Harry as normal a childhood as possible within royal constraints, who wanted them to understand both their privilege and their responsibility to use it well, would have wanted her grandchildren to know their heritage, their family, their place in a story much larger than themselves. But it's also about whether this generation of royals can break the cycle of emotional distance that has characterized the family for generations. The royal family has a history of strained relationships, of parents and children who struggled to connect across the barriers of duty and expectation. Charles himself had a complicated relationship with his own parents. The Queen Mother was said to favour Andrew over Charles. The Duke of Edinburgh was often absent, focused on his own duties and interests. Harry and Charles have the opportunity to do better, to show that it's possible to be both royal and emotionally connected, both dutiful and personally fulfilled. Their reconciliation could model a new way of being royal, one that doesn't require choosing between family and duty, between personal happiness and public service. So let us set aside the polls, the gossip, the endless blame game that has dominated coverage of this story. Let us remember that at the heart of this narrative is a man who has tried time and again to reach across the divide. Harry is not perfect, none of us are, but he is brave. He is loving, and he deserves the chance to rebuild what has been broken. His bravery is evident not just in his military service or his willingness to speak uncomfortable truths, but in his persistence in loving a family that has repeatedly disappointed him. His love is evident in the way he still speaks of his father and brother, with hurt, yes, but also with hope. His worthiness is evident in the life he's built, the causes he champions, the family he's created and protects. And I will say this, my friends, reconciliation is not just about duty or family obligation. It is about healing generations of pain, about breaking cycles of emotional distance and misunderstanding that have plagued this family for decades. If Harry and Charles can find a way forward, perhaps Britain itself can begin to heal the fractures between tradition and change, between silence and truth, between the crown and the people it serves. The monarchy's relationship with the British people has always been complex, based on a delicate balance of reverence and relevance. The royal family must be extraordinary enough to justify their position, yet relatable enough to maintain public support. They must uphold tradition while adapting to change, maintain dignity while showing humanity. Harry's story touches on all these tensions. His willingness to be vulnerable, to admit struggles with mental health, to prioritize family over duty, challenges traditional notions of what it means to be royal. But it also makes the monarchy more relatable, more human, more relevant to a modern audience that values authenticity and emotional intelligence. If the royal family can find a way to embrace Harry's different approach while maintaining their core values, they could emerge stronger and more relevant than ever. They could show that the monarchy is big enough to accommodate different ways of serving, different definitions of duty, different approaches to balancing public service with personal happiness. Perhaps one day, when we look back on this chapter, we will not remember the bitterness, the harsh words, the years of separation. Perhaps we will remember instead the moment when a father and son chose love over pride, when healing triumphed over hurt, when a family decided that their bonds were stronger than their differences. That moment hasn't come yet, but it still could. Every day that passes makes it both more urgent and more difficult, but not impossible. Love has a way of finding a path forward, even through the most difficult circumstances. Families have a way of surprising us with their capacity for forgiveness and renewal. Until then, let us keep faith with Harry. Let us stand with the man who has endured loss that would break many people, scrutiny that would silence most voices, and rejection that would embitter countless hearts, yet still walks forward with hope. Let us recognize the courage it takes to keep extending your hand when it has been slapped away repeatedly, to keep your heart open when it has been broken repeatedly, to keep believing in love when experience counsels cynicism. For if there is one thing Harry has taught us, it is that no matter how dark the night, there is always light when we choose compassion over judgment, understanding over blame, hope over despair. He has shown us that healing is possible, even from the deepest wounds, that love can survive the harshest criticisms, that families can find their way back to each other, even across seemingly impossible distances. And so I leave you with this thought. If Harry can keep extending his hand, despite every reason to withdraw it, despite every voice telling him to give up, despite every disappointment and setback, then perhaps there is hope for us all. Hope that families can reconcile across any divide. Hope that truth can heal rather than harm. Hope that love, in the end, will have the final word. This is not just Harry's story. It is a story of all of us who have ever longed for healing, for forgiveness, for family. It is a story about the courage to keep loving when love seems impossible, the strength to keep hoping when hope seems foolish, the wisdom to keep reaching when reaching seems pointless. In Harry's persistence, we see reflected our own struggles with difficult family relationships, our own hopes for reconciliation with those we love but have lost touch with, our own faith that love can overcome even the deepest differences. His story gives us permission to keep trying in our own lives, to keep believing that healing is possible, to keep extending our own hands across whatever divides separate us from those we care about. If you believe in Harry's courage, in his right to be heard, and in the power of reconciliation, then carry this message forward. Share it with others who might need to hear that persistence in love is not foolishness but wisdom, that vulnerability in the face of rejection is not weakness but strength, that hoping for healing is not naivety but faith. Thank you for spending this time with me, for listening to these thoughts, for holding space for the complexity and pain and hope that characterizes this ongoing story. Until next time, let us hold Harry in our thoughts, with kindness and hope, and let us hold our own family relationships with the same tender care, knowing that love is always worth fighting for, always worth believing in, always worth the risk of one more attempt at connection.